So first of all then, the DMA and ISBAR published a guide called the 7 Steps Ad Tech Guide. And in that guide, there is a huge amount of information about the explanation around what programmatic advertising is, what cookies are, how you use cookies, how the world is changing with third-party cookies, as well as plenty of ideas around how to provide alternative means of advertising which doesn't use third-party cookies. And I think this is really quite useful, because for anyone who is thinking about prospecting for new customers as well as engaging with existing customers, now is the time to really start thinking about building out your first-party data. So my first definitions are straightforward. I think someone needs to go on mute.
Sorry, yeah, that's me. Whoops.
Thanks, Kieran.
So first-party data, what is it? It's the data you collect yourselves from your prospects or your customers. Second-party data, which is something I think we will hear a lot more about in the next year or so, is data that you share that with permission. So an example may be that an airline may share some data with Skyscanner so that they can find out when their customers are looking for flights, but it's generally a one-to-one relationship and it's shared with permission. And then third-party data, which is the area where there is the greatest concern, is data collected by third parties about your customers, which they then may use. And this is where you have the greatest problems from a privacy perspective. And this is also the place where the ICO are taking the greatest interest. So what we've seen, though, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years is that a lot of these third-party ad tech providers, people like Crux and Bluekai in particular, pivoted away from collecting third-party data and started to talk to, and actually sold themselves to Salesforce and Oracle respectively, to start working on third-party databases. So I think what you're seeing is a general drift away from third-party data. So what is the demise of third-party cookies? What's that all about? So basically, in January 2020, Google announced they were no longer supporting third-party cookies and that they would replace that with the Google Sandbox. It's actually called the Privacy Sandbox, and you can find it on the web, and they explain what they're doing. I have to say it's a little unclear what exactly they're going to do, but what they're promising is that they will provide you with means by which you can analyze traffic and performance instead of using third-party cookies. The reason why this is important is that Chrome represents more than 60% of all browsers these days. So in actual fact, even though Firefox and Mozilla had announced that they weren't supporting third-party cookies quite some time ago, it didn't really make much of a difference. With Chrome changing, it does change the game completely. But a couple of other things happened last year. The Privacy Collective class action lawsuit was started against Salesforce and Oracle, which is pretty bold, but I think freaked a few people out. And in September last year, Oracle Data Cloud stopped offering third-party data targeting services across Europe. So I think it's clear that the direction of travel is away from third-party cookies. I don't think they're going to come back. But in actual fact, from a commercial point of view, does that matter? Is it really just the demise of a blunt object bludgeoning people with lots of adverts? In fact, the click-through rates on digital display are scarily low. So in fact, what's also happening is that the world is moving from a place where volume is being king, large volumes of ads being distributed across many platforms, to a place where we're looking for value. So it'll be smaller, higher quality databases with a better insight into who customers are. The other thing that is worth bearing in mind is that there's generally a low level of trust in advertising, and the top reason for that low level of trust is being bombarded with advertising. So even though there is the issue around third-party cookies, there's an additional point, which is it's time to think about not bombarding customers and building trust in advertising again, so that they actually pay attention to what's being said to them. There was a piece of research done by the ICO which said that 20% of people believed they had confidence in how personal data was being used. I mean, that's really quite a low and terrifying number. So trust and confidence is something that we should be building up anyway. And then an additional point here is that if you look at ad blockers, and actually at The Guardian, the problem was even greater, but ad blockers are used by 36% of website viewers. In fact, the numbers come down slightly, which is obviously a good thing. But the reasons why are too many ads, they're annoying and irrelevant, adds too intrusive. So in fact, everything's pointing towards trying to pay attention to what the customer's interested in rather than trying to bombard them with lots of information. And then finally, and this research is a little bit old, but I think is still relevant, is that customers expect a value exchange. 75% of them expect organizations to understand their individual needs, 40% less likely to buy from a company who sends them multiple communications. 59% said they'd unsubscribe for a company's content if the offer it received was irrelevant. So actually there's a huge motivation to try and be more aware of what a customer's interested in. And then there was a final piece of research from the DMA, which said that 78% of customers believe the value exchange skewed towards the corporate. And again, it points to the fact that we need to redress the balance and get to a place where customers feel like they're being listened to and that you provide them with the reasons to trust them, to be trusted, sorry. So what's the natural conclusion out of all of that? The fact is that first-party data is the absolute top priority. If you've not thought about how you want to collect that first-party data, now is a good time to start. I was in a very privileged position at The Guardian in that we did our data project in 2015. And of course, at The Guardian, you have a steady flow of first-party data that you can collect with great ease. So I understand that we were in a privileged position, but you've got to start somewhere. And now is definitely the time to start if you haven't started already. Lots of companies obviously have started already, so I'm not tarring everyone with the same brush. So the first thing about first-party data, why is it important? It's accurate, it's direct from the source, and it's relevant to your business. There's no way that third-party data will ever give you that level of granularity and insight that first-party data can provide. The second thing is that since GDPR has come in, the IAB definitely noted that there is a view that the quality of data has improved and that customer trust has improved as well. So actually there is a general direction of travel towards an improvement in how customers view advertising. And then the final point really is that we need to persuade prospects and customers that brands can be trusted, and that's through a process of openness, transparency, and accountability, all words that the ICO mention quite a lot and probably sound quite boring, but actually we need to try and translate that into our marketing activities. And then finally, the elements of building out transparency and openness is that, talk exactly about why you're collecting data and why. Be clear and explicit about the benefits of sharing data, the what's in it for me question. What are the terms and conditions? Don't make privacy policies or notices or sign up forms that are too complicated. Make those policies flexible and easy to understand, and also make a clear link between what data is being shared and what the benefits are of sharing that data. I'll give you an example. Channel 4, who have been working on their data strategy for quite some years now. When you sign up for Channel 4 on demand, you get a very lovely sign-up form which gives you the exact reasons why they need every single piece of information, and they're very open and transparent about how that data is shared. So what are the kind of 5 key points around collecting first-party data? Well, the first one is know your existing customers. If you're not able to use third-party data, then you've got to do a little bit of work yourselves to find out what those customers are like. So be able to aggregate that customer data into one platform is useful. Not everyone can afford to do that. Obviously, it's not a cheap exercise, but it's certainly something that would pay rewards. So one customer data platform, which you've got transactional data as well as digital data. And I think that's quite a key part of your activity. So what we see now is customers move on and offline seamlessly, and we need to be able to try and track that activity. Know the customers by profiling and segmenting those groups. And actually try to establish which events trigger purchase. Do you know which key data sets you need, and are there any seasonal factors? One of the key points around the ICO investigation into real-time bidding was that they felt that there was an excessive amount of data being collected. So there was hundreds of different fields. And in fact, they wanted to understand whether it was actually necessary to collect all that data. And I think that's really the exercise lots of marketers need to think about, is like, what is the key information that allows you to understand that point at which someone is prepared to buy. And then the final point is segmenting, which is providing segments based on these different customer profiles. And certainly in my experience, that will drive response by a significant multiplier if the segments are built correctly. I'll give you another example about The Guardian. So The Guardian have two very clear segments. There's the guys we used to call the cultural connoisseurs, who are the people who read the newspaper, who were into the arts, who are old, very analog, very loyal, and spent a lot of money with us. And then we'd have another group, which we call the hipsters, uninspiring name, I know, who are young, digital, also loyal, very principled, but didn't really spend a lot of money with us, but were heavy users of our app. And actually how we spoke to those two groups varied enormously, as you can imagine, different age profiles for a start. And that would then give us more engaging ads and communications in order to get to sign up for our different services. So the second point then really is about quantifying the ROI and the marketing activity. Again, I think everyone is able to kind of understand the click-through rates, but are you then able to translate that click-through rate through to a conversion rate, an average order value, renewal rate, but also customer lifetime value, so you can really ascertain whether the person you spent a lot of money acquiring at the beginning of that life cycle turns out to be sufficiently valuable to be worth that investment. And certainly as a subs person, we spent a lot of time thinking about how much money could we afford to recruit somebody before they would pay back. And often if you do a customer lifetime value calculation, you're not necessarily going to get payback in year one. But if you know that you're going to have those customers over a long period of time, that doesn't matter. It allows you to invest more in acquisition. There is another challenge, of course, with quantifying the ROI is that lots of organizations, in my experience, are very siloed. So, the marketing team aren't necessarily tied up with the operations team, which means that they don't necessarily filter the data through and create a seamless flow from end to end. And then if you're able to, creating insight-driven customer journeys from all the information you've collated at the beginning means that you can then move seamlessly on and offline, building journeys based on triggers rather than linear journeys. Linear journeys are very difficult to build these days because people act in all sorts of different ways. And then the other thing which feels tedious probably is to look for opportunities to build engagement in lots of different places. Every single point at which you may possibly have an interaction with an individual, whether it's social media, whether it's through ads, whether it's through email, sponsorship, whatever it may be, are opportunities to collect data. And it may well be it's just digital data, or it may be that you get an email address, or you may even get a kind of, a linear snail mail address, but actually collecting that information and keeping it in one place and building out your models is really critical. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. I hope you can't hear it. And then finally, there's a really key point around communicating effectively. What you're starting to see now is organizations who are treating data collection and the way in which you're collecting as a high profile branding campaign. I've given an example here of IKEA, who is a retailer who's got the IKEA app, and you're able to, and they explain very clearly what they do with your data and how it can personalize your experience. And I think you'll see more examples of that. Again, my Guardian experience was that we had to deal with our journalists actually, who really didn't want us to collect any data, but actually it was being completely open and transparent about why we collected data and what we do with it, helped us to actually build up a huge database, which has helped the Guardian donor base and to get them to a place where they're actually getting an additional revenue stream. So that's sort of the first party data piece. And then there's some other ways in which one is able to market that does not involve third party cookies. So contextual advertising is something that has been growing strongly over the last couple of years. It really helps if you've got some first party data and you understand those people's media habits. So if you've managed to do some profiling and segmenting, that makes life a whole lot easier. There are any number of platforms and solutions who use context instead of behavior to target. And actually, if you look in the 7-step guide, I've got a list of all of the different partners who you might look at. The Ozone Project, who support newspapers, they deliver advertising to newspapers based on context, and high quality relevant content is a good example of that. Lots of solutions that are what they describe as edge computing, which is basically all your data sits on your device until the point at which you actually access the website, means that your privacy is protected, but actually you still get content delivered to you based on context. So permutive is a good example of that. And in fact, the Daily Mail, of all people, are using permutive for delivering all of their digital advertising now, which is a very privacy-friendly way of forwards, and actually quite innovative for them, and important for them actually, because all of their advertising revenue is going to be driven by context. And then finally, there's a real opportunity to investigate vertical advertising networks based on context. And again, if you know enough about your customers, then there is a network for pretty much anybody. The other thing about programmatic is that it's obviously here to stay. Programmatic is not going to go away. It's historically been outsourced to agencies, and agencies, I think, have not necessarily explained exactly how programmatic works. And I think that's partly because they've been building up their own databases. But actually, what we're seeing is a change in that, certainly in the US, and I think increasingly in this country as well, there's a move towards moving some programmatic advertising in-house, or getting to a place where you've got a blended version of some in-house activity and some agency activity, so that marketing teams and marketing departments have a better insight into how their programmatic campaigns are working. And it's also very important, and this is a data protection point really, and the ICO are very interested in this, is making sure you've got clear supplier due diligence at the point when you're procuring these services, that you do privacy impact assessments to understand what's happening to the data, and that the processes these suppliers use are being audited, which again feels tedious but is important, because I think, the ICO have just announced that they're restarting their investigation into real-time bidding and advertising. So these are the kind of activities that they'll be paying very close attention to. And then finally, for those people who haven't necessarily got all of the first-party data that they need, there is an emerging market of collaborative data solutions, whether they're data cooperatives, data marketplaces and exchanges, or technical data environments, which are sometimes called clean rooms. And these are places where you basically are sharing data in a safe environment, permission-driven data, on a one-to-one basis, or whether you're anonymizing or pseudonymizing data in order to help enhance your profiling. My comment on this is that you can see that in the next couple of years, you'll see a great deal more of this activity. Whoever it is you decide to work with, you should check to see how well aligned they are with your own objectives, but also make sure that a data protection impact assessment is done, that you really do understand where the data is going and how it is being processed. Because again, this is the kind of activity that will be scrutinized by the ICO, because in certain instances, it will be on the edge of what is compliant. And then just finally on data protection, I've only got one little slide on that. GDPR is a trailblazer in the global privacy world, and lots of countries are starting to follow their lead. So the EU has had an adequacy decision with Japan. A number of other countries will go that way. The ICO published cookie guidance in 2019, which is unambiguous. Anyone who hasn't updated their privacy notices and hasn't updated their cookie notices and cookie policies needs to do so, because it is totally clear what you should and should not be doing. The World Federation of Advertising published the Data Ethics, the Rise of Morality and Technology, which is really a call to arms to explain and ask people to be more focused around data ethics. And that's largely do the right thing, treat your customers with respect, be open and transparent, all the things I've just talked about. The Schrems II ruling last year meant that we have to be more careful about how we transfer data to the US. I've said here the ICO will restart their investigations. I said that yesterday. Today, they've announced they will. And actually, the Biden-Harris election is a signal that the US is likely to become more privacy friendly. And certainly I've heard that there's a higher chance now of a new federal privacy law than there was in the past. I think if Trump had stayed in power, it would have been a whole different ballgame. And actually the UK may have treated privacy differently as a consequence of Trump staying in power. The fact that Biden's in power, Brexit has happened, means that we're probably going to stay quite strongly privacy focused in the future. So that's the end of my little presentation. I'll stop sharing.